The April rain drummed against the windows with a steady rhythm as I brewed my morning tea. In Lakewood, spring rain was less a surprise and more a season in itself, generous, constant, like the lake whispering back to the sky. I stood by the kitchen window, watching the droplets snake down the glass in whimsical patterns, each one tracing invisible paths of memory. How many rainy mornings like this had I spent in this house? I couldn't count. My name is Merl Hadley, and in 3 days, I'll be 68 years old. For 4 decades, I taught mathematics at Lakewood High School, sharing with generations of students the elegance of numbers and the quiet certainty of logic. Now, retired, my days are filled with a stillness I once cherished. But lately, I've started to wonder if it's too quiet. Sometimes, silence doesn't bring peace, it echoes. My tea, always Earl Grey, no sugar, with a single drop of milk, had long gone cold in my hands, but I didn't move. I stared out into the gray morning, my mind meandering through my to-do list. Groceries, cleaning, maybe a trip to the library if the weather improved. Just the usual rhythm of an ordinary Tuesday. And yet, pulsing beneath the mundanity, was the quiet dread of my upcoming birthday. Would I spend it alone again? The shrill ring of the phone startled me, slicing through my reverie. The number was unfamiliar, but I answered anyway. At my age, any call could be important. Mrs. Hadley, a young woman's voice asked. This is Patricia from Lakewood Glamour Beauty Salon. I'm confirming your appointment for tomorrow at 10 o'clock. I hesitated. I hadn't made any appointment. I opened my mouth to say so, but something made me pause. Maybe this was just what I needed, a small change before my birthday. Yes, I said. I'll be there. After the call, I climbed the stairs to my bedroom and opened my closet. Inside hung the quiet wardrobe of a retired teacher, practical, modest clothes. But in the far corner, I spotted the blue dress Frank had given me for our last anniversary. To match the color of your eyes, he'd said, his voice still so vivid in my memory. I pulled it out and held it up in front of the mirror. The lines around my eyes had deepened. My hair was now completely gray, but my eyes, they were still that same clear, deep blue. Frank had passed away 10 years ago. Suddenly, one moment we were planning our summer trip, the next I was a widow. Sometimes it felt like it had just happened. Other times, like it was a whole other life. This house still carries him in every creak of the floor, every shelf he built, every memory we made. Frank was a civil engineer. He built things. He built our life. Now, when the silence stretches too long, I sometimes speak to him out loud. Today, I held the dress and asked, "Do you think they'll come to my birthday?" By they, I met my son Gar, whom everyone calls G, his wife Tabitha, and their children, 16-year-old Octavia and 12-year-old Fletcher. G is 42 now. We haven't seen each other since Christmas, when I asked to join them for dinner. The evening was a stiff performance of forced smiles and polite small talk. Tabitha barely hid her irritation. G was distant. The kids were glued to their phones, answering my questions with one-word replies. Once, G and I were inseparable. I helped him with homework, cheered from the sidelines of soccer games, read him books until he fell asleep. Frank would joke that I loved him more, that he was my little clone. But something changed in high school, bad influences, rebellious behavior, slipping grades. We worried, but held on. Then college matured him, gave him discipline. He got a degree in finance, a good job, and eventually met Tabitha, beautiful, sharp, and driven. They married in a lavish wedding I hardly recognized. From that day, Tabitha made it clear Gar's life now belonged to her. After Frank died, the distance between G and me only grew. He helped with the funeral, stayed around briefly, and then disappeared back into his world. Now we speak rarely. Last year, they didn't even call on my birthday. Just a text from Tabitha, "Happy birthday, Merl." G's in a meeting. Kids are at practice. Weekend will be busy. Call you soon. They never did. As the rain intensified outside, I abandoned thoughts of going to the store and began cleaning instead. I scrubbed the kitchen, vacuumed every room, washed the windows. It was easier than thinking, easier than facing the truth. My life had narrowed to this house and my memories. My son had grown distant. My grandchildren barely knew me. After tidying up, I pulled out the old photo albums. Page after page of captured time, Gar's first steps, his graduation, our last family vacation before Frank died. I searched for the moment when our bond frayed, but there was no obvious turning point. Just a slow drifting apart. The doorbell rang unexpectedly. At the door stood Dorothy, my neighbor and one of the few people I still considered a true friend. She held out a container of steaming soup. "I figured you wouldn't want to cook in this weather," she said with a smile. "Chicken noodle. My grandmother's recipe." Dorothy is 72, widowed like me, but she carries her age with pride and sharp wit. Her house is often filled with laughter from visiting children and grandchildren. I welcomed her in, and we settled in the kitchen with tea and cookies I had baked the day before. "So, have you decided how to celebrate your birthday?" she asked, sipping her tea like a mind reader. "I'm hoping my family will come," I admitted. "If I can convince them." Dorothy snorted. "You let them get away with too much. I'd have told them off years ago." "I can't," I sighed. "They're all I have." "No, Merl. You have you. And that's enough." She squeezed my hand before leaving, her words lingering even after she had vanished across the street, umbrella bobbing in the rain. She was right. I had let them get away with too much by being patient, by never insisting on my place in their lives. I always hoped they would remember me on their own. With a burst of resolve, I called G. He picked up, his tone immediately impatient. "Mom, is something wrong?" "No," I said, steadying my voice. "Just wanted to remind you, Friday is my birthday. Maybe you, Tabitha, and the kids could stop by." There was a pause, muffled voices in the background. G was clearly consulting with Tabitha. "Look, Mom," he said finally, "we're pretty tied up Friday. Tabitha has a big presentation. Octavia's got rehearsal, Fletcher." "I understand," I interrupted, already retreating. "It's no big deal. Maybe the weekend." Another pause. Then, to my shock, G's tone shifted. "We could stop by for a couple hours. Around 2. I couldn't speak for a moment. "Really? That's wonderful." "Don't make a big deal," he warned. "Just a quick visit. A gift. That's all." "Of course," I said quickly. "Whatever works for you." The moment the call ended, I couldn't sit still. My heart fluttered with cautious joy. For the first time in years, my family would gather not out of obligation, but to celebrate me, even if briefly. Despite G's request, I decided to cook. Not anything extravagant, just special eggplant lasagna, his childhood favorite, chocolate pecan cake, the one he always requested on his birthday, a veggie salad for Octavia, cookies for Fletcher. The next 2 days passed in joyful preparation. I went to the salon. A gentle haircut and soft coloring gave my hair a silver sheen. "You look younger," the hairdresser said, and for once I let myself believe it. I bought a new blouse, sky blue, to match my eyes, as Frank would have said. Dorothy insisted on helping, sweeping through my house like a tiny hurricane, muttering about ungrateful sons and stuck-up daughters-in-law. The morning of my birthday dawned clear, the sun rising after a week of rain. I took it as a good sign. I dressed with care, navy blue pants, my new blouse, a touch of makeup. For the first time in years, I felt not just dressed, but seen. Not just alive, but visible. By noon, everything was ready. The lasagna was in the oven. The cake sat proudly on the table. Salad was chilled, cookies arranged neatly on a plate. Plates, forks, napkins, all in place. And then I waited. The dining table looked modest, but pretty, just the way I liked it. In the center sat a small vase filled with the first spring flowers from my garden, a splash of lavender and white against the soft tablecloth. I checked the clock again. It was nearly 2, and with every tick, anxiety crept in. What if they didn't come? What if G called last minute to cancel? What if I'd allowed myself to hope, only to face another quiet birthday alone? I was already bracing for disappointment when I heard the tires crunching on the wet gravel. My heart fluttered. They were here, my family on my birthday. At exactly 2 p.m., the doorbell rang. I took one last glance in the mirror. Sky blue blouse, fresh haircut, subtle makeup. Then I opened the door. "Happy birthday, Mom," G said, hugging me with all the enthusiasm of a man brushing lint from a suit. The hug was brief, barely a tap on the shoulders, and he smelled of expensive cologne, sharp and clinical, like boardrooms and power meetings. Behind him stood Tabitha, perfectly composed, nodding politely without reaching for an embrace. "Hello, Merl," she said with a tight smile that stopped at her eyes. She wore a gray designer suit and pearls, classic, cold, impeccable. Octavia and Fletcher trailed behind. My 16-year-old granddaughter barely looked up from her phone. Her dyed black hair fell over half her face, and she gave me a distracted glance, thumbs still tapping. Fletcher, 12 now, was growing into his limbs, a lanky kid with new acne and a sulky expression. "Come in," I said, stepping aside, swallowing the sting of their coolness. "I'm so happy to see you. Octavia, Fletcher, you've grown so much." I tried to sound cheerful. Octavia mumbled something that may have been hi, without lifting her eyes. Fletcher gave a shrug and slinked past me into the house. A soft ache settled in my chest, but I tried to ignore it. Something smells good," G commented, sniffing the air. "I told you not to cook anything," Tabitha added, scanning the room like a realtor judging a fixer-upper. "It's just lasagna," I said, gesturing toward the kitchen. "Eggplant, your favorite, and chocolate cake. Nothing fancy." Tabitha's gaze wandered critically over my living room. Framed family photos, mismatched throw pillows, bookshelves sagging with years of paperbacks. "You never thought to renovate," she said, not as a question but a critique. "We could help. Gino's a great designer. Everything here's so dated." "I like it the way it is," I replied lightly, keeping my tone even. "There are memories in these walls. That's why you should change it," she muttered, almost to herself. I chose not to respond. We settled awkwardly in the living room, G and Tabitha on the couch, the children in the armchairs, and me in the kitchen chair I'd pulled over to complete the circle. Conversation limped along. I asked about work, school, their summer plans. The answers were short, shallow. "Busy. Fine. Not sure yet." I smiled through the silences, trying to keep the mood from sinking. "Shall we eat?" I offered when the awkwardness became unbearable. "The lasagna should be ready." At the table, the mood thawed a little. G complimented the lasagna, even sounded sincere. Octavia admitted the salad was not bad, and Fletcher helped himself to seconds without a word. Tabitha, of course, barely touched her plate. "I'm watching my figure," she announced. "How's school going, Octavia?" I asked gently. "Your dad mentioned you were in the school play." For the first time, Octavia looked up at me, face blank. "Yeah, I'm Juliet. The premiere's in 2 weeks." "Juliet!" I lit up. "That's wonderful. I'd love to come see it. Maybe you can save me a ticket." Octavia glanced at her mother, alarmed, and Tabitha answered coolly, "I'm afraid that's not possible, Merle. We only have 4 tickets, for us and my parents. You know how close Octavia is to Grandma Eleanor." "Of course," I said, nodding quickly, heat rising to my cheeks. "I understand." Trying again, I turned to Fletcher. "And how's soccer? Still playing?" "Not anymore," he muttered without looking up. "I'm swimming now." "You are?" I said, genuinely surprised. "That's great. Your grandfather Frank was quite the swimmer. He got a scholarship to a summer camp," G added, a rare note of pride in his voice. "Coach says he's got real potential." "That's wonderful," I smiled. "I'd love to come see one of your meets." Fletcher shrugged, still not making eye contact. "Maybe next season," G said vaguely, already pushing the idea into a distant, forgettable future. Always next season. Never now. I took a breath. "Who wants cake?" I said, standing. "Chocolate with nuts." "We're on a diet," Tabitha said instantly, her hand resting firmly on Octavia's arm. "And Fletcher needs to watch his weight for swimming." "I could eat a piece," Fletcher said unexpectedly, and Tabitha shot him a sharp look. "Just a small one," she relented. "And then an extra workout." While I cut the cake, G motioned for me to follow him toward the hallway. "Mom, we can't stay long," he said quietly. "Tabitha's got a meeting at 5, and we need to get the kids home and changed." My heart sank. They'd barely been here an hour. "Of course," I managed. "I appreciate you stopping by at all." When we returned to the table, Tabitha was already gathering her things, sliding her phone into her designer bag. Octavia hadn't looked up once from her screen. Fletcher poked lazily at the cake with his fork. "We should go," G said, clapping his hands once. "But first, a present." Tabitha handed me a neatly wrapped box, medium-sized, with a gold ribbon. "Happy birthday, Merl," she said, wearing the same polite, distant smile. I took the box gently, a flicker of happiness stirring in me. A gift is still a gesture. Maybe they do care, they just don't know how to show it. "Open it," G said quickly. I looked up. There was something strange in his eyes. I untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. Empty. The box was completely empty. I stared at it, confused, waiting for the real gift to appear, waiting for the explanation. And then they laughed. All of them. Loudly, openly, cruelly. G doubled over. Tabitha wiped away tears of laughter, and Fletcher clapped. Octavia filmed it on her phone, grinning. "You're just as empty," G snorted between chuckles. An empty box for an empty woman. Perfect match. Tabitha leaned in, amused. "It's just a joke, Merl. Don't be so sensitive." Octavia laughed behind her phone. "Come on, Grandma. Don't be such a drag." Fletcher giggled, chanting, "Pacifier, pacifier." I sat frozen, the empty box still in my lap. My chest was hollow and burning. This was my son, my grandchildren. And they had come here, not to see me, not to celebrate, but to mock me, to humiliate me in my own home, on my own birthday. Gee! My voice was faint, as if it came from far away. What does this mean?" "Oh, Mom," he said, still chuckling. "Don't make that face. It's a joke. You were always too serious." "A joke," I said, feeling something inside of me shatter and something colder rise in its place. "You brought me an empty box and called me a pacifier. On my birthday. And you call that humor?" "Don't be dramatic," Tabitha said, straightening her jacket. "It's just family teasing." "Then we have different definitions of family," I said, crushing the box in my hand until the cardboard gave way. "Very different." Their laughter faded. G stepped forward, hesitating. "Mom, don't take it personally. I didn't ask you to come." I cut in, my voice suddenly clear and calm. "I hoped you would, but I didn't ask." Octavia raised her phone again, still filming. "Seriously, Grandma. Chill. I think you should leave," I said, standing slowly. "Tabitha, you got that meeting at 5. I wouldn't want you to be late." They stared at me, startled. Maybe they thought I'd cry. Maybe they expected me to beg them to stay, or pretend nothing happened like I'd done so many times before. But not today. G reached for my hand. "Mom!" I pulled away, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible. I felt strong. "It was just a stupid joke," G had said. "Yes," I replied quietly, meeting his eyes without flinching. "A very stupid joke, and very revealing." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't weep or protest. I simply thanked them for stopping by and walked them to the door with a calm, stony composure. No tears, no accusations, just cold, distant politeness. It clearly unsettled them. They had expected drama, perhaps a breakdown, a desperate plea, maybe even hysterics. But they hadn't expected dignity. Not this quiet, unshakable dignity. "We'll call you this weekend," G said weakly, hesitating on the doorstep. "Don't bother," I replied and closed the door. For a moment, I just stood there in the hallway, listening to the sound of their car starting. Then the engine faded, swallowed by the distance, and I let myself collapse gently to the floor, my back pressed against the wood of the door. In my lap, still crumpled from my grip, was the empty gift box. A pacifier, they had said. They saw me as nothing more than that. An empty, soft, useless thing. I was 68 years old today. I had spent 4 decades shaping young minds as a teacher. I had built a home, raised a child, survived widowhood, and quietly carried more grief than they could imagine. And now this was what they thought of me. I sobbed then, deep, racking sobs that seemed to come from a place I hadn't known was still alive. I sat there for minutes, maybe hours, crying alone on my birthday with only the box to cradle. The insult still echoed in my ears, empty. I don't remember how long I stayed on the floor, but when I finally stood, my joints screamed. My knees throbbed. My back ached. This too was part of aging, not just the gray hairs and fading eyesight, but the way pain lingered in the bones after a fall, even if the fall was only emotional. I moved to the kitchen and began cleaning mechanically. I cleared the plates, scraped uneaten lasagna into the trash, tossed the untouched cake, rinsed the glasses. The cookies Fletcher had once loved were now stale symbols of wasted affection. My motions were robotic, my mind blank. I just wanted to erase any sign that they had ever been here. When everything sparkled again, I went upstairs, walked into my bedroom, and sat heavily on the edge of the bed. The mirror across the hall caught me in its glass. A woman with tear-streaked cheeks and lifeless eyes stared back. My blouse, the one I'd bought for today, looked sky blue and hopeful against the bleakness of my face. The same blouse I'd worn thinking it would be a day of joy. Pacifier. The word repeated in my mind like a cruel metronome. Over and over. Pacifier. Empty. Pacifier. But then something shifted. No, I thought. I'm not a pacifier. I'm not empty. I'm Merl Hadley. I've lived. I've taught. I've endured. I deserve better than this. That quiet anger returned. No longer pain. No longer sadness. It was a cold, clear fire. Not a storm, but a decision. I reached into my nightstand drawer and pulled out the old leather day planner. I flipped through it until I found the number. I hadn't dialed it in nearly a decade. Robert Fisher, Frank's lawyer, a man I hadn't spoken to since the weeks after the funeral. I picked up the phone and pressed the digits slowly, deliberately. It was nearly 7 p.m., and I wasn't sure he'd still be working. But after the third ring, his voice answered. Robert Fisher speaking. Hello, Robert. This is Merl Hadley, Frank Hadley's widow. There was a pause. Mrs. Hadley? Of course, I remember you. What can I do for you? I need to see you. It's about my will, and some other legal matters. He sounded surprised, flipping through what I imagined was his calendar. Tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Does that work? Yes, I said, glancing at the crushed box one last time. It's very urgent. Understood. I'll see you then. I hung up and sat still for a long moment. Something had ended today. But something else, something stronger, had begun. I was no longer going to wait for their approval. No longer going to beg for scraps of love. They thought I was empty. They thought I had nothing left to give. But they were wrong. I still had power, and they were about to learn that. I tossed the empty box into the trash, changed out of my birthday blouse, and slipped into my soft house robe. My birthday was over. The last birthday I'd ever spent waiting for them. The next morning, the air was crisp and the sky unusually clear. I took a cab into downtown Lakewood. Robert Fisher's office was in a dignified old red brick building with large glass doors etched in gold. Fisher and Associates, Legal Services. I climbed the steps slowly, leaning a little more on my cane. The receptionist, a young woman with a sleek bun and warm smile, greeted me the moment I stepped in. Good morning. Can I help you? I'm Merl Hadley. I have an appointment with Mr. Fisher at 10. She tapped something on her computer and nodded. Yes, he's expecting you. Please go right in. The office hadn't changed much. Robert Fisher looked older, of course. His beard had gone almost fully gray, and he'd upgraded his glasses, but he was still trim and sharp-eyed. He stood and extended a hand warmly. Mrs. Hadley, it's a pleasure to see you again. And you, I replied, shaking his hand. Thank you for making time. We sat across from each other, separated by his massive oak desk. I placed my bag in my lap and unzipped it, pulling out a folder of documents. I need to change my will, I said, and get your professional opinion on a few things. I'm listening carefully, he said, pen poised. Do you remember, I began, that when Frank passed 10 years ago, he left everything to me? Yes, Fisher nodded. Your husband had substantial assets. In addition to your house and savings, there were corporate shares, an investment portfolio, and that lakefront plot. And do you also remember, I continued, that I made the choice not to tell my son about the full inheritance? I do, he said, voice even. You were concerned the money might make him complacent. You wanted him to build his life independently. I nodded slowly. At the time, G was already married to Tabitha. Octavia had just started school. Fletcher was still in diapers. G had shown up for the funeral, had helped with the paperwork, made calls, and even stayed with me for the first couple of weeks. Then, like a tide pulling back, he returned to his own life. I remembered the exact conversation that had led to my decision. 1 week after the funeral, G had come over for coffee. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table that now stood bare and insulted. "Mom, I've been thinking about your future," he said, nursing a cup of black coffee. "The house might be too much. Maybe you should downsize. Or," he paused, glancing upstairs, "we have a guest room. You could move in with us." I thanked him, knowing how much Tabitha had wanted that guest room as her office. "No, son," I told him. "I can manage. The house is paid off. I've got savings, and my pension should be enough." "Are you sure?" He sounded relieved, and that's when I knew I had made the right call. He didn't need Frank's money. Not then. And so I'd let him believe the inheritance was modest, just the house and some savings. In truth, Frank had left nearly $2 million in stock, a $500,000 investment portfolio, and that precious stretch of lakefront land that had since tripled in value. I had planned to leave it all to G eventually, as a legacy, a reward for becoming the man we had hoped he'd be. But now, that legacy felt misplaced. "Do you still want to keep the inheritance private?" Fisher asked, breaking into my thoughts. "No," I said. "I want to change the will." He nodded. "And you want to remove your son?" "Not just remove him," I said slowly. "I want to ensure he and his family receive nothing. Not a cent." His brows rose. I could tell he was surprised, but he didn't object. I went on, telling him everything. About the birthday, the box, the laughter, the cruel joke. With each word, his expression grew darker. "That's disgraceful," he muttered. "Truly inexcusable behavior. You've given me more than enough justification." "Yesterday was just the last straw," I said softly. "The neglect started long ago. But I wanted to believe they'd come around. That love would come back. It hasn't." I leaned forward, pressing a hand to the folder on the desk. "Let's begin the paperwork. I'm ready." And for the first time in years, I truly meant it. I taught at the same school where G had once embarrassed me. That incident, the marijuana in the schoolyard, was whispered about in the teacher's lounge, and I felt humiliated. But for Gar's sake, I swallowed my pride and agreed to a trial period. At home, the conversation that followed was one I'll never forget. Frank, who rarely raised his voice, shouted that day. "How could you do that?" he demanded. "Do you realize you've let not only yourself down, but your mother as well?" G sat with his head bowed, his voice barely audible. "I didn't mean to. It's just, everyone was doing it, and I." "And you decided to be like everyone else," Frank snapped, shaking his head. "We raised you better than that." I stepped in between them, laying a calming hand on each. "It's not what happened that matters most," I said gently. "It's what happens next. Gee, you've been given a second chance. Don't blow it." After that, I became more involved in my son's life. I helped him with homework, enrolled him in sports to steer him away from bad company. Frank, always the provider, worked overtime and weekends. We were expanding the house then, and every extra penny helped. I carried the emotional weight while he carried the financial. Bit by bit, Gar improved. He graduated high school with good grades and went on to study finance in college. Frank and I paid his tuition, money we could have used to travel, something Frank had always dreamed of doing. At Gar's graduation, he hugged me and whispered, "Thanks, Mom. I couldn't have done it without you." I was happy that day. I believed my son had grown into a good man, smart and ambitious, with a bright future. The trouble, though, began when he met Tabitha. They worked at the same company, and it didn't take long before she made it clear that G's loyalty now belonged to her and only her. At first, it was the little things. A missed dinner invitation. A last-minute canceled visit. Then came the subtle digs and slights. I remember Fletcher's christening. Tabitha introduced her parents as the grandparents and introduced Frank and me merely as Gar's parents. I bit my tongue that day, not wanting to cast a shadow over the celebration. Frank seemed to accept our son's growing distance with calm resignation. "Let him go, Merl," he often said. "He has his own life now, his own family. It's natural, but it didn't feel natural to me. I had given Gar my everything, my youth, my strength, my love. In return, I got less and less. And after Frank died, the distance only grew. Gar's visits dwindled, his calls turned to short, distracted check-ins. Tabitha, didn't even pretend anymore. Her tone was clipped, her eyes indifferent. The grandchildren mirrored their parents, distant, disinterested, emotionally absent. There were good moments. Shared birthdays. The occasional family dinner that made me think, just for a moment, that we could fix things. But those moments became rarer, while the insults and humiliations became bolder. Forgotten holidays. Canceled plans. "Mom, do you have to wear those clothes?" G would say, embarrassed. "Grandma, you're so boring," Octavia would mutter. And then there was the concert. "Merl, maybe you shouldn't come," Tabitha had said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "There'll be important people there." And then came the empty box. "You're just as empty." Those words still echoed in my ears when Robert Fisher's voice brought me back to reality. "So," he said gently, "what exactly do you want to change in the will?" I straightened my back. "I want to disinherit G completely." His eyebrows lifted. "That's a big decision." "Are you certain?" "I am. I don't want him or his family to receive 1 cent of Frank's money. They don't deserve it." He nodded slowly. "Then who do you want the estate to go to?" I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder, sliding it across the desk. "Here's a list of charitable organizations. The Lakewood Teachers Foundation, the City Library, the Animal Shelter, I foster cats for them, and I want to establish the Frank Hadley Memorial Scholarship for engineering students." Fisher studied the list. "Legally, this is all very possible. You have every right to distribute your estate however you see fit. But allow me as a friend, not a lawyer, to say something. Don't make decisions in haste. Sometimes, once the pain passes—" "This isn't haste," I interrupted. "This decision is the result of years of neglect. Yesterday wasn't the beginning, it was the end. The last straw." He looked at me with measured respect. "Understood. I'll prepare a new will. But there's something else you should consider. After your death, G might contest the will, claiming you were not of sound mind." "What do you suggest?" I asked. "We add a no-contest clause. Anyone who disputes the will loses any right to inherit, even if they win in court. Also, it wouldn't hurt to get an independent medical evaluation to confirm your mental capacity." "We'll do all of it," I said firmly. "There's one more matter," Fisher said. "You mentioned there were other changes?" "Yes." I nodded. "The lakefront property. I want to sell it." Fisher blinked. "Really? That was Frank's favorite piece of land." "I know," I said, swallowing. "We bought it a year before he died. He dreamed of building a summer house for the grandchildren. We talked about fishing trips, swimming, long weekends. After he died, I couldn't bear to touch it. It was his dream. But dreams change." "Sell it," Fisher repeated. "You always said you were saving it for your grandchildren." "Well, they've made it clear they don't want anything to do with me. They don't even want cake on my birthday. I'd rather use the money for something else." "May I ask what?" "I want to move. A new house. Maybe even a new state. Start over." He leaned back in his chair and studied me. "You've really thought this through?" "Yes," I said. "I stayed up most of the night. I realize I've spent too long waiting, hoping. No more. It's time to act." He began jotting notes. "I'll draft the new will immediately. As for the property, we'll need to assess it, list it, and find a buyer. Lakeside land sells quickly, but it may take time if we want a good price." "I don't need top dollar," I replied. "Just make it fast." "If we move quickly," Fisher said, "we could do it in 2 or 3 weeks." "That's fine with me. The sooner, the better." As we wrapped up, he asked one last question. "Will you tell your son about the changes?" I paused in the doorway. "Yes, but not yet. I want everything finalized first. The new will, the sale, the accounts. Then, I'll have a little surprise for them." On the way home, I stopped by Dorothy's. I needed to talk to someone who knew me, really knew me. She opened the door in a colorful robe and a green face mask. "Merl," she exclaimed. "What a surprise. Come in, but don't laugh at me. It's beauty day." We sat in her kitchen with mugs of tea and a plate of cookies. I told her everything. The birthday, the box, the laughter. Then I told her about the lawyer, the will, and the plan. "Good for you," Dorothy said, patting my hand. "You should have cut them off years ago. But are you sure about disinheriting them? It's your son, your grandkids." "I'm sure," I said without hesitation. Let the money go where it's wanted, where it matters. And the move? You're serious about leaving Lakewood? Completely. There are too many ghosts here. Dorothy stirred her tea slowly. You know, my sister lives in Santa Barbara. Beautiful weather. Ocean air. She's been begging me to move there. I looked at her in surprise. You'd go with me? Why not? She shrugged. My kids are scattered all over the place. My grandkids barely visit. It's time for warm climates and new stories. Besides, she added with a smirk, I wouldn't miss the look on G's face for anything. I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in days. It's going to be an unforgettable show. We spent the rest of the afternoon plotting like two conspirators. Dorothy had the idea of hosting a dinner, a reconciliation dinner, and then springing the news. Can you imagine their faces when you tell them the will's changed, the property's gone, and you're leaving town? Oh, you'll have a front row seat, I grinned. Just let me get everything ready. That evening, back home, I found myself in Frank's old study. I sat at his desk, rifling through the memories, old letters, family photos, birth certificates, insurance documents. A lifetime in paper. What would you say, Frank? I whispered to his photograph. Would you think I've gone too far? He had always been gentler than me, more forgiving. Maybe he would have urged me to give G one last chance. But I knew, deep down, that even Frank would understand. There comes a moment when a person must choose self-respect over sentiment. That moment had come. I pulled out a notepad and began to write. What to take into my new life, what to donate, what to leave behind. There was so much to do. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel tired. I felt free. It was a strange, almost exhilarating feeling, as if I were shedding the heavy coat of my past, casting off years of humiliation and hurt, and stepping forward unburdened. For the first time in years, I felt free. A plan had taken shape in my mind, not one fueled by malice, but by justice. G and his family would finally receive what they'd earned. Nothing. An empty box. And in that emptiness, my revenge would quietly bloom. 3 weeks had passed since my birthday. 3 weeks of meetings with attorneys, real estate agents, appraisers, and bankers. 3 weeks during which I hadn't returned Gar's infrequent calls. He'd only reached out twice anyway, both times brief, disinterested, as if it were a chore on his to-do list. The lakeside lot had sold far faster than I expected. A development company that had long coveted the land made an offer well above market value. The money had already been deposited into my account, waiting to fund my new life. The new will was completed, signed, notarized. I even underwent an independent medical examination to confirm my mental fitness, just as Fisher recommended. According to the documents, every asset, my home, bank accounts, stocks, and investments would be donated to the causes I believed in upon my death. Gar and his family were left with nothing. I had already found my new home, a cozy cottage in Santa Barbara, just 2 blocks from Dorothy's. The offer was accepted, the paperwork ready to be signed. All that remained now was the final act of my quiet drama. On Friday night, I called G. He didn't pick up right away, and when he finally answered, I heard the confusion in his voice. Mom, is something wrong? No, I said, steadying my voice. Nothing's wrong. I just wanted to invite you all to dinner on Sunday. There was a pause. I imagined him glancing over to Tabitha, gauging her reaction, trying to decide if I was worth the trouble. Sunday, he repeated. I don't know, Mom. We've got a lot going on, the kids. It's important, G. I cut in, letting a hint of vulnerability color my voice. I want to apologize for how I reacted on my birthday. I shouldn't have taken the joke so seriously. I also have some news I'd like to share in person. Another pause. Then finally, all right, we'll come over. 6 o'clock. Perfect, I said, keeping my tone warm. And I'll make dinner. Don't bother, Mom. We'll eat before. I insist, I said firmly. It's going to be a special dinner. After I hung up, I called Dorothy. She rushed over, giddy with anticipation. Do you think I should wear the black dress? She asked, rummaging through my closet. Feels like a funeral. After all, it is the death of their inheritance. I chuckled. Black would be too dramatic. Something casual. I don't want them to suspect anything until the final act. You're right, Dorothy agreed, putting the black dress back. Surprise is everything. We spent Saturday preparing. I wasn't doing it for Gar or Tabitha, I was doing it for me. This dinner wasn't about reconciliation. It was about closure. My final curtain call on the stage of their lives. By 6 p.m. Sunday evening, everything was ready. The table was set with a white linen tablecloth Frank and I had received for our silver anniversary. I used our best china. In the center was a vase of fresh flowers. The turkey was in the oven, mashed potatoes fluffed to perfection, salads crisp, fresh bread warm from the oven, and apple pie cooling on the windowsill. Everything G had once loved as a child. It would be the last meal I ever cooked for them. Dorothy arrived at 5, dressed in a tasteful beige dress with bright lipstick and a sleek new hairstyle. "You look gorgeous," I told her. "For an event like this," she said with a wink. I almost bought a new dress. It's not every day you get to watch justice in real time. At exactly 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I inhaled deeply, straightened my blouse, and opened the door. Gar stood on the doorstep in a blazer, his smile polite but distant. Tabitha was beside him in a designer dress, her smile tighter than usual. Octavia and Fletcher hovered behind, awkward in their formal clothes. It was obvious they'd taken the invitation seriously, likely hoping for a big announcement. "I'm so glad you could make it," I said warmly. G hugged me half-heartedly. Tabitha offered a clipped nod. The children mumbled hellos. As they stepped inside, their eyes landed on Dorothy. She smiled pleasantly from her seat in the living room. "Dorothy," G said with a flicker of confusion. "I didn't know we'd have company." "Dorothy is my closest friend," I replied. "She's here at my invitation." We sat at the table. I tried to steer the conversation toward normalcy, asked about their work, the kids' school, summer plans, but their answers were curt, vague. It was clear they were just waiting for me to get to the point. They were expecting an apology. Or a check. After the main course, just before dessert, I dabbed the corners of my mouth with a napkin. "Gee, Tabitha," I began, my voice calm. "I invited you here today because I owe you an apology." Tabitha's shoulders visibly relaxed. A small, smug smile touched her lips. Gar nodded, as if bracing for long overdue contrition. "I want to apologize," I continued, "for allowing you to treat me disrespectfully for so many years. For not speaking up when you first began, showing your ingratitude. For tolerating your dismissive attitude. That was my mistake. I allowed it to happen. And I take responsibility for that." Tabitha's smile faded. Gar frowned. "Mom," he began cautiously, "if this is about the box, it was just a joke. We thought you'd understand." "Oh, I understood," I said evenly. "I understood a lot. I finally understood what I meant to you. Nothing. And I've made peace with that. But there's something else you need to know." I rose and walked over to the secretary, pulling out a manila folder. I returned to the table, holding it in both hands. "Gee, did you know that when your father passed away 10 years ago, he left me everything?" Gar looked startled. "Well, yes. The house, some savings. Not just that." I shook my head. Frank was a very successful man. In addition to the house, he left me nearly $2 million in stocks, a $500,000 investment portfolio, and that lakeside property. G's eyes widened. Tabitha leaned forward, her face lit with curiosity. "I never told you because I wanted you to make your own way in the world. I lived modestly when I didn't have to because I believed I was preserving something meaningful for the next generation. For you. For your children." "Mom," G started. I held up a hand. "Let me finish. After your birthday gift to me, after that empty box, I made a decision. I sold the lakeside property." "What?" G shot out of his chair. "You had no right. That land was for the grandkids. Dad bought it for them." "I had every right," I said coolly. "The land was in my name. I got $1.2 million for it." G looked like he'd been slapped. "Where did the money go?" "Half of it went to the Lakewood Teachers Fund and the city library. A portion funded the Merl Hadley Scholarship for engineering students. The rest I used to buy a new house in Santa Barbara. I'm moving next month with Dorothy." There was stunned silence. Tabitha sat frozen, mouth agape. G was pale. Even Octavia had put her phone down and stared at me bewildered. Fletcher just looked lost. "But that's not all," I said, pulling out another document. I've also rewritten my will. Everything, my house, savings, investments, will go to charity. You will receive nothing. You can't do that, Tabitha shrieked, leaping up. It's not fair. Fair. I repeated, raising an eyebrow. Was it fair to ignore me for years? To mock me on my birthday? To raise your children to treat me like I was a nuisance? We never, G began. Don't lie, G. Not to me. Not now. He changed his tone, softening his voice. Mom, we made a mistake. That box, it was a bad joke. We want to make amends. Please, just give us one more chance. No, G, I said, my voice calm but firm. You had 1,000 chances. You wasted them. This is all your fault, Tabitha snarled, turning on her husband. That stupid box was your idea. I told you it was too much. My idea. G barked. You didn't want to spend a dime. You came up with that joke. They were shouting now, loud, ugly, exposing themselves without shame. The mask slipped. The greed, the blame, the selfishness, all of it spilled out. Octavia began to cry. Fletcher stared at the table, wishing it would swallow him whole. Enough, I said, louder than before. The room went still. You don't care about me. You care about the money. Well, now you know. There isn't any left for you. Ever. We'll contest this, Tabitha hissed. We'll prove you're senile. You can try, I smiled. But my will has a no contest clause. Anyone who challenges it forfeits their claim, even if the court rules in their favor. And I passed a full medical exam. Everything is in order. You, Tabitha sputtered, shaking with rage. You old, G began, voice venomous. That's what you are. Always have been. Controlling. Manipulative. Dad pitted you. He told me he regretted marrying you. It was a cruel blow meant to wound. But I was prepared. Your father loved me, G, I said. To his dying day. Our only regret was how you changed when you married her. How you let her destroy our family. Don't blame me, Tabitha screamed. You're always interfering. I only wanted to be part of your life, I said. To be a grandmother. But you made that impossible. And now, well, here we are. Let's go, G barked. Kids in the car. Octavia, still crying, followed him. Fletcher trailed behind, but stopped at the door. Grandma, he said quietly. I wasn't laughing at you. Mom said it was the right thing. Fletcher, G shouted. The boy gave me one last look, then left. The door slammed. Their car pulled away. Dorothy and I sat at the table, untouched plates in front of us, silence hanging heavy around us. What a show, Dorothy said at last, pouring herself a glass of wine. I raised mine. To justice. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt peace. They showed their true colors, didn't they? Dorothy said, her voice low as she poured another glass of wine. Yes, I nodded, feeling a strange emptiness settle over me like a quiet fog. I wasn't angry anymore, not exactly. Just hollow. Are you all right? Dorothy looked at me with concern, her eyes gentle. Your son said some terrible things, she added. I know Frank never said those things to him. He just wanted to hurt me, I replied, shaking my head. And he succeeded, but not as much as he hoped. We sat in silence for a long while, the clinking of dishes the only sound as we began clearing the table. The physical work was a welcome distraction. I scrubbed, rinsed, and dried, determined not to think, not to feel. But once the last plate was stored away, I collapsed into a chair and covered my face with my hands. I've lost them, Dorothy, I whispered. I've lost them completely. No, she said firmly, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. They lost themselves. You did what you had to do. You stood up for your dignity. Should I have? I asked, lifting my tear-lined face. Maybe I should have just kept my mouth shut, kept the appearance of family, and let them keep treating you like you were nothing. Dorothy shook her head. No, Merle. You did the right thing. Cruel, perhaps, but fair. They needed this lesson. I sighed, uncertain. I hope it does them good. Don't think about them, she said gently. Think about our new house in Santa Barbara. Walks on the beach. Wine at sunset. Meeting people who actually care. Your life is just beginning. And it's going to be a good life. I nodded slowly, trying to let her optimism seep into me. For the first time, I dared to believe she might be right. That night, Dorothy stayed over. We spent hours in the living room, sipping wine, listening to Sinatra records, Frank's favorite, talking about the past and speculating on the future. You know, Dorothy said as we were winding down, Frank would be proud of you tonight. You think so? I whispered, looking over at his picture on the mantel. Absolutely, she said. Kind doesn't mean weak. And he would never let anyone, not even his own son, treat his wife like that. Her words stayed with me long after she had retired to the guest room. I sat staring at Frank's photo, imagining his gentle smile, the way he used to hold my hand when I was anxious. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps he would have stood beside me proud. I didn't know if I would ever see Gar and his family again. I didn't know if even a fragment of our relationship could be salvaged. But as I climbed into bed and pulled the blanket over my shoulders, I realized something else. I felt peaceful. No tears. No regrets. Just peace. The next morning, I awoke with a sense of lightness I hadn't felt in years. The sun filtered through my bedroom window like a warm promise. Over breakfast, Dorothy and I discussed the logistics of our move to Santa Barbara. What to take, what to leave, who to say goodbye to. Do you think they'll call? She asked, casually biting into her toast. Gee might, I shrugged. But not right away. First, they'll be furious. Then, they'll try to manipulate me. Pretend they want a relationship. But it will be about the money. Always the money. And if he does call, would you pick up? I considered the question carefully. I would, I said. But it won't change anything. My decision is final. That evening, as if on cue, the phone rang. G's name appeared on the screen. I inhaled deeply and answered. Hello, G. Mom. His voice was strained, forced. We need to talk. About what happened. It was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. I repeated, eyebrows raised. Tabitha and I, we overreacted. We said things we didn't mean. You were upset too. Let's meet and talk. Gee, I wasn't upset. I was calm. Everything I said that night was the truth. I sold the property. I changed my will. I'm moving. It's done. But Mom, that's Dad's inheritance. He wanted it to stay in the family. Your father wanted respect, G. He wanted love. He wanted his family to value one another. None of that happened. We can fix this. Fix what? Pretend to be a family until I die so you can cash in? No. I won't live out my days under false pretenses. There was silence on the line. Then, his voice changed, colder, more tactical. We've spoken to a lawyer. We may be able to contest your new will. Claim you were under influence. Maybe. Dorothy manipulated you. You're threatening me now. Your own mother. I'm protecting my children's future. Their future depends on you and Tabitha, not my money. What you've passed down so far is greed and entitlement. Congratulations. You'll regret this, he said, his voice sharp. Goodbye, G. I hung up. My hands trembled, but I felt no fear. Only grief. The calls continued for several days. Sometimes G. Sometimes Tabitha. Once even Octavia. Their tactics varied. Pleas, apologies, threats. But the intent was always the same. Then, 2 weeks later, Tabitha appeared on my doorstep with a bouquet of flowers and a carefully arranged look of contrition. I came to apologize. Just me, not G. I accepted the flowers but did not invite her in. Please, she begged. Just hear me out. I sighed and stepped aside. She looked around at the boxes, the packing tape, the bare shelves. You're really leaving? Yes. In 10 days. She sat down, hands folded like a schoolgirl. Her voice trembled with faux remorse. I haven't been fair to you. I want us to be a real family again. I want my children to know their grandmother. But her eyes betrayed her. Cold. Calculating. This was strategy, not sincerity. Tabitha, I said softly, thank you for your words. But it's too late. My decision stands. Her face twisted. The mask fell. You're a selfish old woman. What about the children? Their future is up to you and G. Not my money. She exploded. G was right. His father regretted you. Goodbye, Tabitha, I said, guiding her toward the door. The days that followed were filled with packing, selling furniture, saying goodbye. The calls from G dwindled. Eventually, they stopped altogether. When moving day arrived, I walked through each room slowly, whispering goodbye. The kitchen where I made Sunday pancakes. The den where Frank used to nap with a book on his chest. The bedroom where we whispered dreams in the dark. Goodbye, Frank, I whispered, tears blurring my vision. I loved you here. I'll love you wherever I go. Dorothy and I hit the road. The cottage in Santa Barbara exceeded every hope. A sunlit terrace, a tiny garden, ocean breezes. And Eleanor, Dorothy's spirited sister, welcomed us with champagne. Life began anew. We met neighbors, joined clubs. I took up painting. Dorothy even flirted with a local boat captain. And I met Gordon Parker, a retired literature professor with a kind face and a love of music. We became fast friends. Time softened old hurts. G called occasionally. Once, he asked if I was happy. Yes, I said. I am. 6 months passed. Then a letter arrived. A real letter, handwritten, stamped. From Octavia. Her words brought tears to my eyes. She apologized, reflected, ached for connection. Will you answer her? Dorothy asked. Yes, I said. But not just yet. Gordon and I walked the beach that evening. Forgiveness doesn't mean going back, he said. It means peace. He was right. I wrote to Octavia a week later, telling her I forgave her, inviting her to visit, not to reclaim the past, but to begin anew. That day, sitting on the terrace, sipping tea, I watched the ocean shimmer in the distance. Roses bloomed in the garden, and I realized something simple, profound, and beautiful. I was happy. Finally, truly, deeply happy. I was Merl Hadley, not just a mother, not just a wife, not just a shadow in someone else's life, but a woman who had survived betrayal, reclaimed her dignity, and found peace under the Santa Barbara sun.